kickoff meeting of the FTWG, the Financial Transparency Working Group, and I had a hard time saying FTWG, so have been slang around the office calling it the FitWig. So today is the first formal meeting, you didn't know you were joining a meeting with a name like that, of the FitWig group. I'm sorry about that. Maybe it'll stick, maybe it won't, but well, let's move on anyway. So I am going to turn it over to Katie for a moment, who will tell you how to use your screen.
Hi, everyone. As you can see on this slide, I have a sample of probably what it looks like for you all looking at this webinar. So there's two different tools that you can use to participate in this webinar. We have muted everyone just to reduce the background noise, but if you'd like to be unmuted, please use the little raise hand looking tool. And when you click that, it'll let us know we can unmute you, and then you can participate. So we can, and we'll vocalize that, like we'll let you know when we see your hand raised, and we'll tell you that we're unmuting you so that you can participate if you want to say something. And then another great way to participate without being unmuted is to use the comment box. So feel free to use that at any point. Anything that you do type in that box though does go to the entire group.
Wonderful. So let's jump on in. As you know, this meeting is it's about states and districts working toward meeting the new federal requirement for financial transparency down to the school. But just to give you a sense, first of all, of who are your compatriots in this effort, the participating SEAs that we have at the moment with their lead name contact are listed below. And Katie, did you want to say something about who's involved?
Yeah, so this is not by any means a representative list of every person that is on this call. This is just kind of the main point of contact that I've been working with each SEA, and we'll show the LEAs in just a second, but we just want to say thank you to everyone who is on the call. As you can see, it is a lot of people, so we just want to, going around and introducing ourselves would take the whole hour. So we want to thank everyone who's here. I thank all the SEA teams and all the LEA teams as well. And this also is, I think, at this point out of date. There are some other LEAs as well who are on the call, and it will continue to grow as states identify their participating LEAs. So just wanted to thank all of the school districts for joining today also.
As we know, the districts are a key partner in this effort, so it'll be great to have you involved along the way to help work on this financial transparency. We also have a list of partners. They're generally not on the call today, but these are some of the groups that will be weaving in throughout our project together, and in ways that can help convene the group or bring technical assistance to the group or bring experience with data and communication to the group, and so on. So there's analytic horsepower here, and a whole lot of other really top-tier partners, and the list is, I think, growing. So you will have some access and exposure to these groups along the way, particularly the in-person meeting, but some of the others, and we just wanted to let you know who they were. If you are working with a partner of some sort in your state around this particular issue, let us know, and it may be somebody that we want to weave in more formally, and potentially help share their work as far as this effort is concerned. So that's just a little bit of it, and you'll be hearing more from them later, although most are not on the call yet. The Act, the Every Student Succeed Act, does include in the law the following language that says that SEAs will need to report the per pupil expenditures of federal, state, and local funds, including the actual personnel expenditures and non-personnel expenditures of federal, state, and local funds, disaggregated by source of funds for each LEA and each school, which is a new part of this, in the state for the preceding fiscal year. So this requirement is actually not in the supplement, not supplant section, which has gotten a lot of national attention. This is in the school report card section. It's in the law. So it's not something that is dependent on regulatory language. It is actually part of the law. It requires, as far as a deadline, of December 18th for the 2017-18 school year, although it appears that there may be some regulation that would give some extension on that. We're still finding out. Regulations will be written on this part of the law, and they will help clarify what is to be reported, including, as we've heard, that state and local funds will be grouped together as one category. So SEAs will not have to report state funds separately from local funds, that those will be aggregated together. Federal will be kept separate. But it is in the law, and a financial transparency piece that will require some effort by many states, but also poses really quite an amazing opportunity. And so we'll just give you a little quick sense of that. The opportunity, as we see it, to report school level spending data is that, so first of all, many of you may know that most places we don't have school level spending data. So if you woke up this morning and said, I wonder what we're spending at Maple Leaf Elementary School, and you went online and maybe looked at the district's budget or looked at the state website, you could find a lot of information about Maple Leaf Elementary School, but you would be unlikely in most places that you'd be able to figure out what was spent at that school, particularly in terms of all public funds. And I know that I ask this question of principals, of district leaders, of parents, even community groups, teacher groups. How much money is spent at your school, even in terms of per pupil numbers, and people don't have a sense of it. And that's because this information really hasn't been part of the data picture that we've had in the past. We have known for quite some years that the school was an incredibly important unit in the education system, a unit of change, a unit, an important unit when it comes to understanding performance, things like that. And that's why No Child Left Behind asked for student outcomes data by school. And that information has come out. It's really part of our vocabulary now. We think about schools in terms of their performance, but we haven't had this expenditure piece. So we haven't been able to say we have these outcomes and what are we spending? Is the school spending more than its peers or less than its peers? How does the spending compare among schools with similar populations and things like that? So it does align an important data element with to complete the picture, I think, on schools, with we have our sort of dollars going in and our outcomes coming out. I think secondly, and maybe more importantly, this is really exciting, is that having this kind of data can activate school level engagement toward this task of leveraging dollars to do the most for students. So we know that that school level factors play a large role in determining the relationship between spending and outcomes. As somebody who studied school finance for a really long time, I'm embarrassed to tell you how long, there were many years where we thought that the biggest determinant of outcomes was how the money was used, sort of what we chose to spend it on, how many teachers, how many nurses, the mix of paraprofessionals, reading coaches, things like that. And some of those factors, of course, do play a role, but we underestimated, I would say, how much other human variables play a role in determining how well resources get converted into outcomes. And that is something I think people in schools intuitively knew forever. And this way, what we can do is, rather than ignore that piece of the puzzle, the idea here is that financial data can activate that piece of the puzzle. If those in the school understand sort of how much they're spending, and that their own human context has a lot to do with the outcomes, they might work toward leveraging their dollars in different ways or with different kinds of behaviors to get the greatest outcome possible. So I'm really optimistic about this part of the puzzle here. And lastly, of course, there will be equity implications. In some places, schools may find out that they're not getting what they feel are their share of the funds, or they may feel like they haven't gotten their share of the funds, but once they take stock of it, they may be ahead of the game. So there will be a lot of opportunities for people to look at this data from an equity perspective, but in a way that allows communities to then wrestle with it and consider a range of different choices about how to move forward. So this part of the law does not demand reallocation at all. And so the data here are really supposed to be more about transparency. So that's our big picture there. Remember, if you want to make a comment or a question or type in the chat box, go for it. I know that while I'm talking away, we will also be having other people keep an eye on those and can interrupt along the way. So last night I was putting together this presentation, and one of my teenagers came in and said, "That looks like the most boring presentation on the planet," which I'm sort of used to. I have 4 teenagers and I can take it from them. But she said, my daughter said, you know, you're supposed to put a meme in every PowerPoint now, which I didn't know, but you know, I guess you're supposed to. So here's what I found. If you don't compare your finances, I'm going to come out there, over there, and ... That's our meme. Sorry for the momentary entertainment piece. I don't even really think it's that funny. But there aren't a lot of consequences for this. I think in the law, the idea is in order to receive your Title I money, you're going to have to do this kind of report card things. But I suspect there will be a lot of ways to meet the requirement. So it's really, I hope you look at it as more of an opportunity than kind of a punishment or a compliance thing. But we'll see. So I also brought a few pictures of what data can look like as you're starting to think about how it might be useful. And these are some data sets that that I helped create, and some visualizations that I helped create, but there are many others, and we're going to show many others to you all. So this is some that we just had handy, but I hope you'll come to the next meeting where we're going to show you some real ones that exist in states. But if you think about this, and this is one way of displaying data, is to put the financial on the horizontal and the outcomes of data, which you can now pair to on the vertical. And each dot here might be a school. And you can start to get a sense of how, maybe your school compares. Maybe your school has higher spending, maybe it's lower spending, but still has higher outcomes, and get a sense of how that relationship plays out down to the school level. If you're a state and you're building this data set, you can start to add things like these filters here that give schools the chance to compare themselves to relevant peers, and that can aid in kind of the discovery of alternate ways of doing things. So if you happen to be a rural school with a large bilingual ed population, you could sort of dig through this data this way and look around from your peers to say, are there others that are able to do more with their money than I am? And if so, can I learn from what they're doing? Or maybe when I take stock of my peers, we're really beating the odds for our students, and we should protect what we're doing and resist some efforts to kind of regress to the mean, because we're ahead of the mean at the moment. And those are things that people can do with their data. You can imagine individual schools can use the data to talk about it with their teams, to say things like, I know a lot of you wanted to do a big overhaul, but right now, if we're in the upper left-hand quadrant here, we're beating the odds with the money we have. Let's make sure we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Or if we're in the lower right-hand quadrant, for instance, we're an expensive school. We are not yet able to get the same kind of results that our peers get, especially if you're able to kind of narrow in to have more similar peers up there. And that means we may need to roll up our sleeves and try to figure it out. We need to plow through and solve the problems that are unique to our context, tap into our strengths, and leverage what we have, overcome and accommodate for our weaknesses, and get it done for our students. And I think that kind of data that we have here could allow for more of those conversations. Some of the other features you might be able to do, you might be able to expand your boundaries, say I want to look across the entire state. Depending on how you develop your system, you might be able to look across multiple states, and that way schools could really drill down into finding peers that are similar to theirs. I think low-income urban cities, schools don't really like being compared with their higher spending peers that maybe are in a suburb or attached to a university or things like that, and somehow being able to drill down into the student populations could, and even the size ranges, could help give schools some confidence that the data have value to them. So that's what we're after. So now we will jump here in for a minute and tell you what we've been up to. We've done introductory conversations with, I think, nearly all of you. And one of the things we heard a little bit, and we didn't systematically set out to collect this yet, but is that SEAs are all over the place in terms of what kind of school level data that they may have access to now. So in this first blue box, there are some SEAs where they have a common chart of accounts for their entire state, meaning that all the districts are recording data under the same sets of categories, and those categories include a field for location, meaning that if we have a teacher in second grade or a counselor as a charge, that's coded to a particular school, which allows us then to kind of roll up our financial data in a way that brings us this information more clearly. Even among the states in that first box, some are collecting it, some have just piloted a new common chart of accounts but have not rolled it up to the state yet. But among those that have collected it through their general ledger with their location, there are still some under 1A here that might be using real salaries, which means they essentially have a complete set of data, financial data. Or in 1B, those are states that after they've rolled up their data, it still contains average salaries, not the real salaries of the teachers that work there. And so we've tried to take a stab at categorizing states, and I know in many cases we've gotten it wrong. We've either heard conflicting information or we didn't specifically ask the right questions. We weren't, setting out to do that, but I wanted to kind of take a stab at putting states in different buckets. So hopefully you will be able to work with us to get this right and to expand the categories if needed. So some SEAs, we did hear a little bit about this. They're implementing a common chart of accounts, but they haven't yet either implemented with all their districts or rolled it up. Maybe it's in a pilot phase. And I think from what we've heard, Nebraska, Oregon, maybe in that state, and there may be others. So we will be thinking about this working group in terms of dividing sometimes into batches of SEAs and districts according to where you are with the data, because the data challenges are such a big piece of this. There's in box number 2, there are several states that have participated in something called the school level finance survey with NCES. That's where the state may have asked districts for data aggregated into certain categories, and then put that into a survey form and sent it to NCES. That is a different way to get a start at getting some school level data. And for states that want to start first by building on that data set or some other similar kind of collection, there will be an opportunity to focus on that. Any state, of course, can put themselves in a different box if they want to implement a common chart of accounts and sort of roll up that data by the location. You could move over to box number 1, but we know that there are quite a few states in this second box at the moment. There are also some SEAs that, while they might roll up their data to the district. So what they're getting from districts is district level data, not broken out by site. They do have access to some really important cost information that is broken out by site, and that's often personnel, salary, benefits data. And several states have access to this, and some of them have it for all school personnel, some of them maybe only for certificated or instructional personnel, and we, again, aren't totally clear here, but that's a big batch of other financial data that you might choose to build on. if that's your easiest route to do this, or your preferred route. Because the salary data and benefits data, as you know, tends to make up about 80% of the expenditures. And that means if you're going to either pilot a chart of accounts or something else like that, you may not have to do it for your entire data set all at once. And then finally, the SEA may not yet have access to really any information, financial information at the school level. So this is box 4. And there are some states in that position. And what you can do is sort of, we can help work with you to figure out a path which may either resemble one of the paths your peers have already taken or ahead of you on, or might come up with an entirely new path. So as I mentioned, I'm not sure we've captured all the states correctly here. We have some more work to do on this, but I wanted to just let you know where we were in thinking about parsing this large group of SEAs. And that's not the only data we need. That's the financial piece, but we'll also want to be able to pair that financial data with school level demographic and maybe even outcomes and performance data. The school level demographic and performance data are already on your school report cards, so we know you'll have that. But if you want to build a system that's particularly useful for your state and goes beyond kind of the minimum compliance, then you'll want to put a little more nuance and color to your data and be able to show how financial data compares among schools, potentially with populations of more bilingual ed students or higher poverty populations and so on. As everyone knows, financial data by itself doesn't tell you much. If I tell you that one school spends, 11,500,000, and that equates to 9,600 per student, that alone you say, okay, is that a lot? Is that not a lot? How does that compare to other schools like mine? How does that compare to more affluent schools, and so on? And that's, I think, where the information can be really useful. Okay, so the FitWig will provide, let's see, Katie, I think maybe you were going to go over this. I think people are probably sick of hearing me talk.
Yeah, sure. So we've gone over this as well in our individual conversations, but we just want to rehash what we are going to do as a working group. So we'll meet virtually on topics related to meeting the requirement, and Marguerite will go over that again in a minute. But that'll happen about 2 to 3 times per month. So hoping for a biweekly meeting. There might be more frequency meeting for some folks who need additional technical assistance and things like that, but mostly 2 to 3 times a month. And then we are meeting in person February 8th through 10th in DC. I'll go over that again in a minute in a little bit more detail. And we're also going to be using what we learned from these working group meetings and our in-person convening to develop some tools, cases, reports, and other materials that are going to live on a website that you all will have access to through a password protected link. And then eventually, once this working group has progressed to the point where we feel like those tools can be made public, they will be shared largely with other states to help them get to where you all are in this financial transparency work. And then finally, we'll be doing some individualized SEA and LEA support, and Marguerite will explain that in a little bit more detail.
Excellent. So the individualized support will come in 2 forms. There'll be lighter touch support, which is available to everybody in the group. We are going to have designated office hours, and those may include us and some of our partners. And those will also be available lighter touch support during the group meeting. So we might be, you'll have opportunities to ask questions or, upload data or look at kinds of things. And that can include things like reviewing your data plan, general data alignment issues, SEA decisions about attribution of different expenditure types. So this is going to be a really big, tricky piece of this puzzle. A school district may spend, let's say, $12,000 a student, and only 6,000 of it or 8,000 of it appears at the school level. That's for good reason. Some of that money is expended in centrally managed accounts, sometimes for things like transportation, Obviously the superintendent's salary, there are legal bills, insurance, other kinds of things that may or may not be parsed in any way that makes sense out to the school level. And so there'll be some decisions about how to treat that money. There'll be some pots of funds that you're trying to decide if you include them at all. Like obviously money for adult education shouldn't be attributed to schools at all. But there are other thorny, questionable expenditures that many districts, including those on the call, will already be thinking about, like, how does this money count in our spending? And I just having woven through a lot of districts' expenditures, districts will make an expenditure on security for an empty school building. And is that sort of a service to the city, or is that an expenditure that should be loaded on to other schools in that way? So we'll be talking about these kinds of issues, and there are some costs. Maybe they are bilingual education central office department costs. Should those be divvied up across all bilingual education students, and so on? If we don't come to some common agreement inside each state, you don't have to all agree with each other. You can come up with your own methodology. The law says that. But if you don't come up to some common agreement, then you really won't have much to compare across schools, because that means each district can choose to put more money in their central pot and not put it in schools. So you would want to make sure to account for all the money somehow and just be clear about how funds got divvied up in that way. So that'll be another piece we'll be talking a lot about. And we'll be able to review equity runs or kind of analyses that groups bring to the table, either with you kind of individually or in these working group settings, and give you guidance on your visualization options, your communications. We've learned a lot about financial communication, as have some of our partners, and so you'll want to tap into that when you can. And then there'll be more customized support, and that is a little bit more intensive support for SEAs and LEAs. And that we don't have infinite resources. Our resources come predominantly from the Department of Ed and only stretch so far, and really only stretch so long. We have till the end of next summer, really, to do this project. We'll probably continue the working group quite a bit longer than that, but it won't include as much customized support in the out months. And but so we will be concentrating that for those SEAs or LEAs that are consistently working at a faster pace. And so you can see this, you could kind of opt in or opt out of that. If you're interested in this issue, you have the capacity, you can dedicate the resources to really tackling this issue, and then you want to drive ahead faster and sort of work wherever you are toward trying to meet this goal, then you will get more technical assistance from us. And that's not to say that everybody should be striving for that. Some of you may have just had an SEA chief turnover, you might be seeing a reorg, you might really just not have the capacity to work on this right now, or you just may need the longer time zone, that span. So that's fine, but since we have this limited amount of resources, we will concentrate those on those ones that are working more quickly. And that could come in assistance with integration of data. We actually help you with that, actually running equity runs on your data for you, or giving you tools that can help you do that, importing your data into different kinds of visualization frameworks so you can take a look at it, assist with drafting potential communication or messaging. And know that if you're part of that, what you're doing is helping create a set of materials that could be useful for the rest of the state. So the information will feed into the shareable materials that ultimately are brought to bear for the rest of the group. Okay, so what are we going to talk about in all these meetings? You kind of got a lot of hints already, but some of the near-term meeting topics. We'll be reviewing existing examples that are out there. Some states have stuff on their websites that show a lot of expenditure data. What works, what's missing from those, and that's always a great place to start. As we mentioned, we'll be doing a more complete data inventory and developing a data plan with many of you. or you'll have the opportunity to do that, and that will be a meeting topic. There will be some effort for those places that need to convert from using average salaries to real salaries. And I hope folks know what I mean by this. In many districts, positions are accounted for financially, at least by sort of an average cost of that position, instead of at least when you start to divvy up costs by school. But the law does want the actual salary costs included in those spending comparisons. So if one school has predominantly more senior, more expensive teachers, it's likely going to look more expensive, and that's part of the transparency piece. And there will be a meeting on how to marry the school level finance survey data with other data to complete the financial picture. You can see some of these are going to be customized to certain groups, collecting financial data from districts, exploration of sample school level visualization. We talked a little bit already about how we're going to have to really dig in on the attribution rules. What do we do with funds that aren't coded kind of by school? What do the data runs show? So we're going to want to leave a lot of time at meetings to dig in and say, like, are we finding patterns that we're comfortable with? How are we going to message these? What are we going to do? How do we give people a chance to look at them and formulate their responses? Would they be worried or would they not be worried? How will we parse data for different users, if that's a question? And as you can see here, some of these topics are going to be more relevant to some of you than others. And so for that reason, we're imagining that there will have meetings and you don't need to attend them all. There will be ones that different groups, if you were in that data group number 1, that data group number 2, and so on, or if you're an LEA, that there will be meetings that you really want to go to, and those are the ones with the box and the check. And there might be ones that I have to check my circumstances, or we've already solved that problem here, or I'm ahead of that, I already know what's going on, or I've solved it, I'm going to come because I can share what we've learned already. So we don't want to exhaust you as part of this working group, and so we'll be trying to give you a sense in advance of the topics for the meetings, and to the extent to which you should feel some urgency to attend. And as I mentioned, that we're going to review some existing examples on our next meeting, which is December 1st, which we will talk about a little bit more in a moment. We have some other things coming up, and Katie can share those here.
Great, thank you. So just to give you a little bit more detail about the in-person meeting, again, we've talked about this on our individual calls, but it is beginning to take some more shape as the weeks go on. So we will be meeting February 8th to 10th in DC. There will be programming for SEAs and LEAs, and that programming will probably be on different days. And so when we say the 8th to the 10th, it won't be entirely likely that everybody needs to be there all 3 days, but we'll have a more structured schedule coming out as soon as we have it, so you all know and can start planning for that. It'll be co-hosted by CCSSO. They're already convening the CIOs from all SEAs at that time, so it is a natural partner. And we'll have all the partners that we mentioned before will likely be present, will likely be leading to different discussions and conversations. So we think it'll be a really valuable opportunity for all of you to attend, and we'll be reaching out shortly to start collecting some RSVPs, so start thinking about if it fits in with your schedule for your state or district.
Excellent. And what's next?
All right, so thank you all for your questions about the recording and the slides. It is recorded. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be available online. We actually have a password-protected members-only kind of site that we're going to be sending out information to you all to be able to access. So that'll come in a follow-up email from me. Also attached to that email will be just the PowerPoint slides themselves, so you can have access to them and can distribute them as you need to. You're also probably going to be hearing from us pretty soon about data inventory materials and requests. As Marguerite mentioned, we are going to need to start collecting or at least receiving links to where some of that academic data is, and then we'll also need to get some information about the financial data that you do have. So like Marguerite showed, where the states are kind of distributed on this 1 to 4 continuum, you might feel like your state was misclassified there, and that could definitely be true. But we need to know a little bit more about your data, your financial data particularly, to be able to move you along that continuum as appropriate. So be looking for that from me as well. Our next meeting will be December 1st from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to try to keep this time frame for all the folks that are distributed geographically. This is a pretty good for everyone time. And during that meeting, we're going to be reviewing existing examples. So we'll be calling on some of the states that are a little bit further along to show us what they're working on. And then you all can ask questions of those states. You all can participate. You can think about how that would work for your system. And I think we'll all start getting pretty excited about the possibility of what this data can show. And then we're going to have office hours a couple times a month, and we'll have them at the end of every call. So today we're going to be on till at least 2:30 to answer any additional questions, and we'll do that for every call that we have, stay on for an additional 30 minutes as long as it's utilized. But if people drop off, then we'll stop. But just want to let you know, when we say office hours, that's kind of what we're referring to, just kind of open air time for questions. We can unmute everyone, and we can have more of an open conversation. Did I miss anything on here, Marguerite?
No, but I do want, we're coming at the end of the stuff we wanted to tell you all about, so I hope at this point you'll either raise your hand to ask a question or type in a comment or a question in the chat box. Our question for you is, what are you feeling that you will need most as you embark on this work? And you may not have thought about it yet, but if you have, that would be really helpful as we prioritize meetings and our work plan. So, use that little raise your hand button, or go ahead and type something in the chat box and hit send, and we can discuss that.
So we do have a question from Amy, and I'll go ahead and unmute you, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Yeah, this is Amy in Honolulu. I think one of the things that could happen and we need to think through is, once we figure out what these data pieces are, is how to provide the principals the support and training that they need in order to articulate this to their communities. I think that could be a big challenge for some of the non-fiscally minded principals out there. So just something to think through on the back end of this when it happens.
Yes, excellent point, because they will be the front lines of fielding questions when in December 2018, or a little bit later, this thing goes live, right? So somebody will call and say, hey, how come you spend this much money and I didn't know that, or you don't spend as much as this one, or you spend so much on this thing, or something like that. I think you're absolutely right that, especially if we're trying to turn this into, make sure that this becomes an opportunity to improve your system, the principals need some support. So I just wrote that down. I think that's a great idea. And luckily there are some training materials in the works and that are used by some of our partners that are designed specifically for principals, so we'll be able to draw on those as well.
Great. We have another question from Derek Ritchie. Go ahead and
hi, Marguerite. My question is, I know that this is largely an SEA requirement in terms of SEAs need to report this. So as part of this working group, what do you see as the role of the LEAs?
That's a great question. Thank you, Derek. I think the LEAs have, this is really about them, even though it's being done by the SEAs. And so we were hoping that the LEAs would engage in this both as a way to say, what kind of data collections from us are feasible or not feasible? Are you asking something we can or cannot do? Or can you please make sure to parse the data in a certain way, because it will help provide information in our community that gives the kind of messages that make sense for our LEA. So if you're a district and the SEA says we're going to put the following numbers on our report cards, you know, in some time, you might say, it would really help if you also broke out the special ed. Because otherwise they're going to say, why in the world is that school spending so much? Or it would really help if you showed that we're a school district that has a lot of costs at the school level that others have centrally, and I want all that money in there so that's apples to apples. Otherwise our schools just look more expensive, and they're not. Or, you know, can you give us a chance to look at our numbers well before they go public, because we're all going to need some time to absorb them. And that's why we're hoping the LEA voice is an active one in this process, because the LEAs are going to be so impacted by it. So I maybe that's a burden for you all, but I hope you also see it as an opportunity.
We also have a request here to take and produce a one-page fact paper that can be shared so we all stay on the same message about the various roles and opportunities. So we will be revising the one that we have a one-pager that we have shared out already. We'll revise that to talk about the LEA role and opportunity and make sure that that's available on the member website for you guys to grab and share as necessary.
That's a great idea, because I think you may be getting questions from lots of different groups on this, and that can be useful.
I have a question here from Eleanor with Boston. Your sample data display shows adjusted per pupil spending and adjusted outcomes. Do you expect that SEAs and LEAs may pursue a similar adjustment as we begin reporting? If so, how? We may not be able to answer today, but I'd love to see it addressed in the future.
That's a great question, Eleanor. Thank you. I pulled that from some other analysis that I had done, and I imagine that some so SEAs can actually, beyond the minimum requirements, report whatever else they'd like. So if the minimum requirements show a story that the LEAs feel is incomplete, like you show this expenditure stuff and it doesn't take into account for the fact that I live in a really high cost of living area, or I have a student population that is X, Y, or Z, or something else like that, then the SEA can also show whatever other adjustments it would like to do. And if those adjustments make the data more relevant or more useful or more trustworthy, then I think the system will be stronger and more valuable to the people in the state. And so, what I'm saying is the law doesn't require any adjustments. It does require, you know, the real dollars, but adjustments are certainly an option for SEAs to put on top of their numbers as well. So as far as that gets concerned, we can do an entire meeting on what sort of additional data that should be included in those comparisons, and I think there will be some meaningful and important ones depending on the state.
Another hand up here from Jennifer Oaks, I think, and I went ahead and unmuted you, so you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, thank you. This is Leanne M. in Colorado, and one of the things that I was wondering about is how you all have been thinking, or if we will be thinking through potential data privacy issues that go along with reporting potentially high costs of special education down at the school level when maybe there's a very small population in that particular school, or something like that. I'm just wondering how you all have been kind of thinking about data privacy issues and in the schools when it comes to financial expenditures.
Thank you. That is a really good question, and one we certainly glossed over in this PowerPoint. So usually when we dig into financial data by most states is considered public information. As you know, individual student level data, or data that's even aggregated that could give you student level data, you know, subgroups under certain sizes and so on, are not public information. But quite a bit of the financial data is, and most of the demographic or the performance data has already been kind of plowed through many of those data privacy issues. But that's a good question on the special ed costs. So I think we may need to do a meeting on how to protect privacy, even if it's not required by law. Like, what adjustments do we make that just don't feel right, you know, if we put the data out there. And I am certain that the data quality campaign would have someone brilliant to help us with that. And your point about, like, let's say there's only one special ed student in a school and it's a really expensive student, is that fair to sort of publicize the costs associated with a single student? I don't feel great about that, but there may be ways that we take the costs of the highest need students and we aggregate them and make them kind of a district load on all the schools. And that might be a decision that that the schools agree to, and that may end up being compliant with the law. So I'm not sure I have an answer for that, except that is a really good issue to raise, and we should weave that in, because there are probably other data privacy angles on this that we haven't thought about and may not think about until we get all the way into it. So thank you for that. I will add that one to the list as well.
Thank you so much. And I think we can't only think about special education populations, but also maybe, you know, ELL populations. And I think we just need to be cognizant about that. Thank you.
You're right.
Great. So I have one question here from Weston with Indianapolis Public Schools asking about, you know, are we going to be posting any discussion notes from these conversations? So we will be posting on the members site the copy of the PowerPoint deck from each one of the working group meetings, as well as a recording of the actual meeting. And I think that when we get down into some of these more detailed topics, we will capture some discussion notes, and particular the ability for you all to link with each other, right? If one organization, SEA, comes and shares some information, we'll make sure that you know who is sharing what, and so that we can connect you outside of the meetings. But we won't be taking detailed kind of notes of each one of these conversations. But we'll pull together what were the important learnings and summarize those.
I also think there may be some times where you have a question or a comment and you really don't want it to be kind of in the public space. And that may be just because you're sort of dealing with a particularly confusing stakeholder group, and you're just trying to brainstorm out loud. You can come to the office hours. The office hours will not be recorded, and it won't. So you can have that conversation there. You can also reach out to us separately, and we have no intention of trying to sort of expose anything like that. So if you think about it both as a way to, we're really trying to share information. We aren't trying to stick it to anyone.
Okay. And I also have a question here from Maine. Not sure if Maine is unique, but they have districts that either operate no schools or no schools for a particular grade span. How do you envision costs for those situations being reported?
Maine is unique, but there's some other states that are unique as well that have, I would say, similar sort of asterisks by their lists of schools and districts. There are some that may have a location code. There's 2 schools in the building, so then you have things like that. There are some where 3 separate districts co-operate 1 school. So there's a bunch of places where I would say there is an asterisk, and those are ones that are going to need a little probably more customized approaches to this. The law does say that the SEA comes up with a methodology to kind of parse their spending, and those methodologies will certainly differ across states because the conditions differ. Some places have a lot of charter schools, and every charter school is an agent, is its own LEA. In some cases, the charter schools are an agent of the other LEAs. So there are just simply, as a practical matter, going to be different approaches to capturing and parsing and reporting these kind of data. And so Maine, we have an eye on you guys because we have been worried about that, but there are some others that are in similar situations. We don't have answers for you yet, though. Anyone else?
Don't see them.
All right, we will stay on for a while, but I will cut you all loose if you like. You may have some other specific questions or concerns when we end the meeting, and stay on. The rest of that is not recorded, but we are here and available to answer any questions or comment accordingly. So let us know. But otherwise, thank you all for coming. I know this was a slog to get through it all, and I appreciate the enthusiasm we've had around this effort. And I'm very hopefully that you'll find that it's not just about meeting this requirement, that there's a lot of opportunity here to connect with your peers in other states. This is a kind of a professional group that doesn't have as many opportunities to interact with each other, and we're personally really looking forward to doing that with you all. So reach out as needed, and we will do the same. And thank you.